Afternoon. Good morning. My name is Poojitha. So today we'll be talking about a very general topic, which is about email. In today's class, we'll be discussing about email threats, organization email policy, university email policy, and securing emails. So these are the four topics that we'll be covering in today's class. So let's look at our first topic, which are email threats. Now, if an organization is using email, then what are all the difficulties or threats that the organization faces? We're going to look at it from different perspectives. The first one that we're going to learn today is legal liability. Usually an organization or the employer is responsible for all the information that is transmitted on the systems. Irrespective of who sends or receives the mail, all the information that is basically present on their systems is the responsibility of the company or the organization. If any employee in the organization is sending inappropriate mails, then the organization itself can be sued in a lawsuit, and it can result in multi-million-dollar penalties. Now, for example, if an employee is targeting a competitor company and sends some inappropriate messages to a competitor email, or if there are any sexual harassment emails that are basically sent using a company email ID, then all of this can basically invite penalties or lawsuits. An organization is liable if one of its employees sends an email containing virus. Now, these are the situations where what happens, the company becomes responsible for their employees' acts, and basically invite legal liabilities. The next is confidentiality breaches. Now, this confidentiality breach is basically a breaking of the confidentiality agreement. Now, this can be accidental. When in the address space, you basically by mistake type out the wrong recipient ID and it goes to the wrong person. It can either be accidental or it can be intentional. Intentionally, you send out company private information or confidential information to others. Now, to just take an example in this case, there is a company which is called as Borland in the United States. So this Borland employee uses his company email to send confidential information to the competitor. Now, what are all these confidential information? It could include trade secrets, product design, sales data, etc. He basically uses his company email ID to send all such details to the competitor company. So this is an example of a confidentiality breach. Next, damage to reputation. One of the important email threats is damage to the company's or the organization's reputation. So a badly written email, if an employee actually sends out a badly written email either to the customer or to the vendor or to the consumer, then it will basically create a bad impression upon the organization. So it would just damage business, or it would probably reflect on business practices of the organization. Next is lost productivity. In the US, there was a survey which revealed that 86% of the workers always use their company mail IDs to send and receive personal mails. And 30% of the employees' time was actually spent in actually reading emails. It was concluded that emails containing gossips, jokes, and other time-wasting content should actually save a considerable amount of employee time. So what you're actually seeing here is lost productivity. So the amount of time basically he spends in a company working is spent on reading emails or looking at jokes and chats and wasting considerable time on that. And most of the time, a company email ID is provided for company use, but it is being used for personal use. So this is basically lost productivity. Next is network congestion and downtime. So when we talk about network congestion, this happens especially in emails because of a process which is called as spamming. So what is spamming? Spamming is sending a single mail to a large number of users on the internet. So these spam mails and personal emails can actually waste bandwidth resources of a company. If you're going to send out a large number of mails with attachments or executable files or MP3 files, audio, video, then this is going to basically decrease the company bandwidth resources. And most of the time employees do not actually zip the files. When I say zip the files, they do not actually compress these files when they are actually sending it to the recipients. Email viruses are also a problematic area. So viruses, when they're basically sent through the email, it causes network congestion and it causes downtime. Next is the email retrieval on court order. Most of the time, email is used for communication, and emails are used as evidences in the lawsuits. So even in certain times, company computers can actually be confiscated, and they can be used as evidences in the lawsuit. Moving on. There is a screen here. I'm not able to move the slides. I'm not able to change the slides. So now these are all the email threats that basically a company faces. So we discussed about legal liability, where all the information that is transmitted on the company systems can invite lawsuits. Confidentiality breaches, where the confidentiality is broken, either it could be accidental or intentional. Then we spoke about how writing bad emails can reflect on the organization and cause damage to the reputation. Then we spoke about lost productivity, because most of the employees' time was basically used in forwarding emails that contained gossip and jokes and time-wasting content, and how most of the time is spent in reading emails. And then we spoke about network congestion and downtime, how network traffic or the bandwidth resources of a company is basically decreased because we're continuously forwarding emails to friends and family. And also these emails include very large attachments which are not actually zipped. And also viruses that are sent through email can cause congestion in the network traffic, and how emails can actually be used by court as an evidence. Now, these are all the threats that companies face when they basically use emails. Now, in order to overcome these threats, the companies need to basically look at a solution. So what do? They basically need an email policy. Now, what does this email policy do? An email policy is just rules and regulations and procedures that is basically given to every employee in the organization. It's about the do's and don'ts with the company email. So what does it do? The first thing it does is it basically prevents these email threats that we discussed in the last slides. It stops misconduct at an early stage. So if any employee is sending out sexual harassment emails to other female workers in the company, or if he's sending out confidential information to competitors using his company email, or he's trying to impersonate or he's trying to be somebody else by using an email ID. So these email policies help to basically detect this misconduct at an early stage. It can also minimize an organizational's liability for the employee's action, which means that when companies have email policy, they will not be held responsible for the employee's action because the company has actually taken steps. They've basically devised an email policy to prevent the inappropriate use of the email system. Next, if an email filtering software is used, in most of the companies, these email filtering softwares are basically used to monitor the employees' emails as to what they're doing, whether they're leaking out confidential information or what kind of use, whether it is being used for official use or personal use. So this software is basically used to monitor the employee's mailbox. So if the company does not inform the employee that their mailbox is actually being monitored, then it could actually lead to privacy issues. But if the email policy of a company states that they are using email filtering software to monitor the employees' emails, then it will not probably result in any privacy issues. So this is why these are the points as to why a company basically needs an email policy. Now, how does a company or an organization basically create an email policy? When they create an email policy, they need to take into consideration some of the points such as the email risks, so that all the email users know what kind of risk they're putting the company in because of the harmful effects of their actions. Then they need to take into consideration best practices. Now, what are these best practices? It includes email etiquettes and writing rules. It includes how to basically draft an email, because an email actually reflects on the company's reputation. So good writing rules, email etiquettes of writing emails, compressing attachments to save bandwidth. Now, all these are nothing but best practices. Personal usage. The company mail policy should state correctly and clearly, in clear terms, if personal mails are actually allowed, and if they are allowed in the company email policy, to what extent or what is the scope of personal emails in the company email policy. Now, wastage of resources. Again, employees are want not to engage in non-business activities that basically tie up network traffic. In most cases, some of the employees would have subscribed to certain newsletters. On an everyday basis, they keep getting advertisements and copies of the newsletters to their email, and if there are a large number of employees in the organization, this could basically tie up the network traffic. And prohibited content. So the company email policy will basically clearly tell the employees what kind of messages they can create and distribute. These should obviously not include messages about race, gender, age, sexual orientation, pornographic messages, religious or political beliefs. It basically needs to have content that is meaningful with the job that you do in the organization. And email should also not discuss information about competitors. If your company is merging with another company, or if your company is acquiring another company, and copyright infringements, copyright and trademarks and patents. So all these kinds of information should not be there in your company email. So email risks, best practices, personal usage, wastage of resources, prohibited content. Looking at all these points, you basically start drafting your company email policy. Moving on. Now, the company email policy also has other points, such as document retention policy. Now, most of the organizations provide a mailbox to the employees that do not have too large storage area. So now the policy also states as to which messages can be deleted or which messages can basically stored permanently. So there are organizational policies that dictate as to which messages can be archived and which messages are not archived, and which messages should be deleted after a certain number of days. That is about document retention policy. Next, they also talk about treatment of confidential data. So each employee has to follow rules and regulations when he's handling confidential data. For example, he must indulge in encryptions, he must change his passwords regularly. So he has to take certain precautions when he's basically dealing with confidential data. Next, email monitoring. I told you most of the companies basically involve in email filtering software to monitor what exactly goes on in an employee's mailbox. So now this email filtering software must be explicitly told to the employee that his mailbox is being monitored. Otherwise, it could lead to privacy issues, and the employee can actually file a lawsuit against the company for intrusion of his privacy. So these kind of things as to creation, storing, sending, and receiving on the organization's computer system has to be explicitly stated. And publishing this email policy. An email policy is basically about the do's and the don'ts that the organization's employees should follow while handling their company email. Now, this is actually published in the in the handbooks, in the company handbooks, it is circulated to all the employees, or when the employees are basically hired, it is there in their contract. So that is how it is made known to each employee in the organization that there is an email policy, that there are certain do's and don'ts that they have to basically follow with regard to the company email policy. So when they create an email policy, all these points should actually be taken into consideration. Now, moving on. So far we've basically discussed about a company's email policy. Now we're going to move into a university email policy. If you go into any well-established universities of the world, and if you go onto their website, you have an explicit column which mentions the university email policy. Now, what is this university email policy? Most of the time, universities create mailboxes for their employees, for the staff, and for the students. So there is exchange of information and ideas between them. Email is the most obvious means of communication over the internet. It is the most simple means for communication. And since university is a place where the freedom of speech and expression or academic freedom is basically encouraged, so the university has an explicit email server. They create their own email servers and they give out official email IDs to all their staff, students, and the teaching faculty. But now they also place certain restrictions on how this university email IDs can basically be used. Now all these terms and conditions come under the university email policy. So if you go onto their website and look at any established university's email policy, you're going to see scope, purpose, who must follow this policy, how the email accounts should be used, official email address, how the email, what are the rules and regulations related to emails being forwarded, confidentiality and security, misuse of the emails, retention and the disposal of the emails, sanctions means punishments that are actually given out to the students or the staff in case there is a misuse of this email policy. So every major university basically has this email policy. Now let's go into our syllabus to see what is the purpose of the email policy. So the university community. Now what makes the community of the university? It is the staff, it is the students, and it is the office staff. Is informed about the policies and the laws about email. Email services are basically used in compliance with these policies and laws. So whoever is using the university email policy, it should be compliant with whatever is the university email policy. So the email users are also informed about concepts of privacy and security. Now all these things are done so that disruptions to the university email server is minimized. Now what is the scope? Scope means extent. Whom all does it basically cover? All email systems and services owned by the university comes under the university email policy. All users and holders of the university email services, all university email records in the possession of the university employees also comes under the university email policy. Now, what are the specific provisions in the university email policy? We're going to see what is the purpose of having a email policy for a teaching institution or a university. Now, email services are provided by the universities to support teaching, research, and public service. Now, it explicitly states the purpose. Now, who are all the users of this policy? University students, faculty, and staff. Non-competition. Non-competition means the university policy, email policy explicitly states that their email services will not be used for any kind of commercial services, or it will not be used by individuals or organizations who are outside the university, which means they will only be used by staff and faculty members and students of the university and not by an outsider. And it will not be used for any kind of commercial services that involves any kind of monetary gain. Restrictions. Now, what are the restrictions on the university email policy? It will not be used for unlawful activities. It will not be used for personal financial gain, or it will not be used for commercial purposes. Representations. Representations in the sense a student or a faculty who is using the official university email ID will not go out or make statements or send emails to other organizations or make statements on behalf of the university. So they will not be using their email ID to basically represent the university outside. False identity. Email users will not employ false identity. Interference or disruptions to the university email servers by forwarding email chain letters, by spamming, by sending letter bombs. Now letter bombs is when large number of emails are actually sent to a single recipient, so he's basically unable to use his email service. That is called as letter bombing. Or personal use. Now university emails can up to a certain extent be used for personal use, but again there are conditions as to till what extent they can be used so that it does not interfere with the computing facilities of the universities. So these are all the specific provisions while drafting a university email policy. Now, how does the university email policy provide security and confidentiality? So the email users are expected to follow certain professional practices of email records, data application programs, and system programs. Now, what are these professional practices? They will probably create different folders for different kinds of information. They will compress all the attachments before it is being sent on the university network. These are all professional standards of using an email. And to prevent intrusion and misuse of email users should employ protections such as passwords. You all know what are the rules that are related to passwords. It should be changed frequently. It should be a strong password. It should not be your name or anything that is known. So there are all password protection schemes that can be basically used. And email users should be aware that even though the senders and recipients delete their copies, backup copies of the emails are always available on the university servers. Even if you delete the emails from your mailbox, the deleted emails are still available on the servers of the university. And systems are actually backed up on an occasional basis to prevent the loss of data. And email users can also obtain information about what are all the backup practices that are actually followed. Now, campus responsibilities and discretion. If you take a university, now who is the person in charge of drafting this university email policy? It is generally the chancellor or the vice chancellor whose responsibility it is to have a robust email policy. Now, it is the duty of the chancellor or the vice chancellor shall develop, maintain, and publish procedures that implement this policy and basically communicate to the campus users of the university email services. So it is actually the chancellor who basically develops, maintains, and publishes the email policy. And if there are any violations of the university policies, it basically results in restriction. You will not be allowed to use the university mail system. And if there are any disciplinary actions that should be taken, again, that comes under responsibilities and discretion. Also, the chancellor or the vice chancellor shall decide to publish students' mail addresses as directory information. So each university basically has a directory, just like you had your yellow books for landline numbers. So now they decide to basically publish the students' mail IDs as part of this directory information. And they also establish guidelines as to who may use this university mail services. And they also establish procedures as to what are the actions that will be taken after the email user affiliation with the campus is terminated. So suppose a student graduates and finishes his studies and moves on, then they decide as to what to do with his email account, either retain it or probably get rid of it. Now, those kinds of decisions are also taken by the chancellor or the vice chancellor. Now, these are all the campus responsibilities and the discretion. Now we'll talk about email security. Now you all might be wondering who is actually going to use email. We all use WhatsApp, and WhatsApp is a messaging service. It is much more convenient. It is available on our phones. It can be used to send out text, audio, video. It can also be used to send out Excel documents or spreadsheets or even PDF files. Now, who is actually going to open an email and add an attachment and send it across. So you might be wondering if there is any community of users who actually prefer WhatsApp, and why, as to why we should be using email. In most of the corporate communications, email is still the preferred means of communication. WhatsApp is just a messaging service. It is a chat application. And when you take emails, it is easier to search the email for the messages that have been sent and received, whereas to track a conversation on WhatsApp is very, very difficult. Also, emails can be printed out. You cannot just take, it's not very easy to take a backup of WhatsApp and get everything printed out. So there is a very, very clear distinguished role between these two applications. Now, email is vital for communication. Email is vital for commerce. Most of the online commerce also happens through emails. Now, if we are talking about email security, then there are 4 important points that we need to take into picture. One is confidentiality. Confidentiality in the sense that this message that we basically send, this email that we basically send from the sender to the receiver is not tampered before it reaches the receiver. Message integrity. When we say message integrity, whatever the sender has sent, the same information should be received by the receiver. Then we say that the message integrity has been saved. Next, sender authentication. Sender authentication, the receiver should be left with no doubt that he has received the message from the correct or authenticated sender. Non-repudiation means the sender cannot deny that he has basically sent that particular message. So when we talk about email security, these are the 4 important points: confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and non-repudiation. So in order to establish email security, there was a standard which was called as PGP, which stands for Pretty Good Privacy, that was introduced in 1991. Now, PGP is at least 30 years old, and it was developed originally by a man named Phil Zimmermann. Now, why was PGP developed? PGP was developed in order to make email communications more secure. But nowadays, Gmail, if you use email services like Gmail, now Gmail also provides encryption. All the messages that you send and receive through Gmail are encrypted. But back then in 1991, emails were generally most used, but it was also very simple to hack these emails. There was no scheme for encryption. So if you wanted to encrypt your emails, or if you wanted to add digital signatures to your emails, then you had to use additional software. And one of those additional softwares or standards was PGP. Now, PGP could be used to basically encrypt files and folders and text messages, or a part of your disk space. So whatever you want, you could basically encrypt it. And the other use of PGP was basically used for adding digital signatures to your emails. So as I told you, it was developed by Phil Zimmermann in 1991. It is open standard and open secure. So now we need to understand that softwares can be open source and they can be open standard. Now these two things are different. When I talk about open source softwares, it actually means that the source code of this software is easily available online, and you can basically use it for reference, you could use it for debugging, you can actually modify the source code of such softwares. When we say open standard softwares, then only technical description of the software is available online. And what is open secure? When I say open secure, it means that this particular software guarantees a certain degree of freedom from danger and risk. So this PGP is open standard, which means there are technical specifications of the software product that is available online, and it is open secure, which means that it guarantees, it assures us there is a certain freedom against risk and dangers. Now, why is PGP used? PGP was basically used for encryption or protecting data in long-term storage, and it was used for email security. When we talk about PGP in terms of email security, it basically provides 5 services. One is authentication, the second confidentiality, the third is compression, the fourth is email compatibility service, and the fifth is segmentation service. So even if you're using Gmail today, but you want an additional layer of encryption for your mails, or you want to add digital signatures, then PGP can basically be used. PGP also has another version of open source software that can also be used for email security. Now let's look at this one by one. When I say authentication service, uh, authentication, what does authentication mean? It means the receiver should be completely assured that the sender is an authenticated sender, that he is receiving the information from the correct sender. This is authentication. Now, how do you ensure authentication? It is through digital signatures. Now, what are these digital signatures? Digital signature is basically a digital code that is generated and it is attached to any electronically transmitted document to verify its content and the sender's identity. Okay, so it is a digital code that is basically added to any electronically transmitted document. And what does it do? It verifies the contents of the email and it verifies the sender's identity. So if you want to guarantee authentication, then you have to make use of what is called as digital signature. Now, PGP, it allows us to add digital signatures to the email, and the verifier basically verifies this digital signature using public key cryptography. Now you know what is public key cryptography. You've already studied in the first unit. A public key cryptography basically uses a pair of keys. One is a public key and one is a private key. So for example, the sender, he basically encrypts the message using his private key, and the message is decrypted using the public key that is basically available to everyone. So for example, let's see, at the sender end, there is a hash function which is basically used. Now, what are these hash functions used for? A hash functions is basically used to encrypt the email. So that email is basically encrypted using a hash function which is called as SHA-1, and it is used to create a 160-bit message digest. So the output of a hash function is basically called as a message digest. So this email message is basically encrypted using a hashing function. This hashing function is called as SHA-1, and it basically creates a 160-bit message digest. Now this message digest is again encrypted using an algorithm which is called as RSA algorithm. Again, you have studied this RSA algorithm. It is a public key cryptographic algorithm. And how is it encrypted? The message digest is encrypted using the sender's private key, and the result is actually attached to the message and it is basically transmitted. When the receiver actually receives the message, again the receiver uses the RSA algorithm, but with the sender's public key, he or she basically decrypts the message digest, and then the receiver actually compares the locally computed message digest with the received message digest. If both of them are the same, it means that the sender is authenticated. Okay, let's look at it again. So in order to ensure authentication, you basically use digital signatures. Digital signatures are nothing but digital codes that are attached to any electronically sent document to verify the contents and the sender's identity. And PGP uses public key cryptography to basically encrypt these particular emails. Now, hash functions are basically used for digital signatures. So at the sender's end, a hash function is basically used. This hash function is called as SHA-1. It is used to create a message digest, a 160-bit message digest. And then the message digest is again encrypted using the RSA algorithm. How is it encrypted? Using the sender's private key. When this message is basically received by the receiver, again the receiver uses the RSA algorithm, the sender's public key to decrypt it, and then he compares the message digest that he has decrypted at the receiving end to the one that is sent along with the mail. If both of them match, it means that the user is authenticated. Next, we'll see how PGP provides confidentiality. Now, PGP, in order to ensure confidentiality, it uses a symmetric key encryption. What is symmetric key encryption? The same key is used at both the sender and the receiver side. The same key is used at the sender side to convert plain text into ciphertext, and the same key is used at the receiver side to basically convert the ciphertext back into the plain text. And for confidentiality service, you have a choice of 3 different block cipher algorithms, but the most commonly used block cipher in PGP is called as the cast 128. Now this 128 actually refers to the number of bits that are actually present in the key. So it uses a block size of 64 bits and a key size of 40 to 128 bits. Now, how a confidentiality is ensured? So the message, okay, you basically compose an email message. Along with the message, you generate what is called as a key. Now, this key is called as a sessions key, and the length of the key is 128 bits. So sender, along with the message, he generates a key which is basically 128 bits, and then this message is encrypted using that particular key that has been generated using the cast 128 block cipher algorithm. The RSA is then used for encryption of the session key using the receiver's public key and also sent along with the message. So your email is encrypted using the session key that has been generated, and again the session key is encrypted using the RSA algorithm. So there are 2 stages of encryption here. The receiver then uses the RSA for decryption and recovery of the session key. Once he decrypts the session key, using the same key he will be able to decrypt the particular message. Now this ensures confidentiality so that nobody in between, a third party, is not able to comprehend the email that you're basically sending. Now, compression service. Now, PGP also offers compression service. Compression service is nothing but using zip algorithms, where you basically compress long attachments and then basically send it in order to reduce network congestion. So all compression services are also provided by PGP. Email compatibility service. Now, email compatibility service is encryption. Whenever digital signatures are encrypted, it results in binary strings. But network message transmission is actually character oriented. So these binary strings might actually be converted into ASCII strings. And there is an algorithm in PGP which is called as the Radix 64 algorithm, which is basically used for this purpose. So encryption, you want to convert binary data into ASCII strings, and that ensures compatibility with all kinds of email platforms. Segmentation service. Usually when you draft a very, very lengthy email or you have a lengthy attachment, the email is actually broken down into segments. So PGP also has facilities for segmentation, that is breaking down your email into parts. And again, at the receiver end, it is basically reassembled. So all these services are basically provided by the PGP. Now, why do you need to use PGP? Because PGP can be used on a number of platforms like Windows and Macintosh. It also uses a simple graphical user interface to encrypt your messages, and it works in a wide range of applications, which includes file storage applications and email. So PGP is 30 years old, but actually it is still used today because of all these advantages. So we come to the end of today's lecture. So if there are any questions.